Hello, New Zealand. Welcome to Political Playback. I had to think about that because there's a few programs we've got going at the moment. Simon, I didn't say Solid Ground because that's your show, fortunately, and I didn't say McBlog. How are you?
I'm very well, and I have to say, it's not a surprise, as you say, not only the number of shows that Family First has now, but last evening you celebrated the 400th episode of McBlog, so that's something to acknowledge.
Yeah, no, it was a good night. We counted down the top 10 most viewed videos on YouTube and on Facebook. One of them had just under 500,000 views on Facebook. The highest polling one on McBlog was about the international media response to the Posey Parker debacle, and also the way our media had covered it. Especially, there was a bit where News Hub talked about Posey Parker doing an interview, and she was adjusting the zip on her top, and News Hub made out that she was doing a white supremacist sign or something. I mean, it was almost as embarrassing as those so-called moderators last night on the presidential debate. But anyway, we're talking New Zealand, aren't we?
That's right. Well, we won't go down the American rabbit hole tonight.
No. Okay, well, let's get straight into it. Several high-profile New Zealand sporting identities and Olympians have signed an open letter. They're urging the government to think about fairness and safety. They want the guiding principles for transgender athletes participating in sports changed. More than 50 Olympians, including gold medal winners Barbara Kendall, Joseph Sullivan, Stephen Ferguson, and former Silver Fern Anna Stanley, who we know as Anna Rowberry. And they signed the letter that challenges the government to ban male advantage from women's sports. They say that Sport New Zealand, and when you're thinking Sport New Zealand, of course, we think Raiding Castle. That name should ring a bell, Israel Folau, is out of step with recognising the biological and physiological differences and inherent genetic advantages between sexes in sports. Wow, who knew? So firstly, Simon, before I come to you for your comment, let's talk to Ro Edge from Save Women's Sports Australasia. Ro, thanks so much for your time. Firstly, congratulations. I mean, to bring together an open letter like this with so many well-known names in the sporting field that was quite an effort. How hard was that?
Well, I have to actually thank others for that. It was Dr. David Gerard, who is an absolute legend, and he just commands so much respect from the sporting community. Lorraine Moller, who's obviously a mentor and has just been a strong supporter all the way through, and my other spokeswoman, Candice Riley. So Candice is an athlete, ex-New Zealand rower. So within 2 weeks, they managed to pull all those signatures together. So that is actually really impressive.
Yeah, incredible. Okay, so this letter was presented and you were in Parliament yesterday, and I saw some footage. I saw some stuff on X, formerly Twitter, with a photo with Winston Peters, the Deputy Prime Minister. I know that you went and saw Chris Bishop, who's the spokesperson for sport for the government, for National. What was the political response to the letter?
Winston was great. Obviously, we met with him first, very supportive. We get the feeling that he's given National a deadline to act on the coalition agreement, and he wants the coalition agreement to be met. He doesn't like things to fail. Like if he says he's going to do something, he wants it to happen. Chris Bishop, I think, was a little bit shocked by the letter. I don't think he was expecting us to be as prepared as we were. He really didn't believe that this was an issue in community sport, and that came across loudly and clearly. And even when we started to show him some examples, he immediately started to write them off and say, those are overseas, they're not here. And we're like, no, Minister, these are here. And so we've actually given him context to 2 brave women who are willing to speak to him so that he can actually hear their voices. And when he recognised that, I think he started thinking, well, why am I not hearing these voices? And so that's when we presented the guidelines and said, these are all the reasons. Every sports policy begins with a threat. The transgender guidelines Sport New Zealand produced basically say that if females raise issues of concern about fairness and safety, that is called discrimination, bullying, and harassment. And so there's no opportunity. And I think by the end of our meeting, it was pretty robust discussion, I'll be honest, but I do think by the end of the meeting, he finally got it. The penny dropped. And there was one thing actually, Bob, that he had told me in an email back in May that he was happy to take the watching brief approach that he was doing on the transgender guidelines, because Sport New Zealand had informed him fairness and safety there were exemptions in there for females. But I pointed out to him today that there weren't, and he couldn't find them either. So I think that was a big reason for his turnaround, and he'll be very unhappy with his officials, I would imagine.
Yeah, look, and the commentary that I see from those who are opposed to the open letter say, look, there's no examples in New Zealand. In fact, I think I saw some commentary that said there's not even threats in the upper level now that Laurel Hubbard isn't sort of on the scene. But of course, I mean, you were giving examples. Can you just give us an example of at a local level how it's affecting sports?
Yeah, sure. So we have a lady in Nelson who played roller derby, for instance. She'd been playing it, I think, for about 12 years. She loved her sport. She'd been the victim of domestic violence, and for her it was a fantastic outlet to be with women and play sport. A man self-identified into her roller derby team just for the purposes of roller derby. He lived as a man the entire remainder of his life. And on one of the first games, he was quite aggressive on the roller derby rink. And so she kindly asked him if he could just try to be a little bit less aggressive because it was actually creating anxiety for her. And he just basically had to go, and she ended up being pushed out of her club. We have, a 12-year-old girl who played in a cricket tournament. Well, there was a whole lot of 12-year-old girls who played in a cricket tournament over in the Hawke's Bay, and a boy was self-identifying as a girl, and he dominated games that he was in. But he was also sharing the accommodation with these 12-year-old girls. At no time was any consent given by the parents for their daughters to share accommodation with a boy. So that's just a couple of examples, but there's so much more. And if we talk about, well, it's not really affecting elite sport, it actually is, because, we've still got Kate Weatherly still winning women's podiums and women's prize money, which is part of that pathway going up to the elite level.
Okay, beginning of the week, there was another open letter on a totally different topic, which was front page. The media were all over it. It was on One News. You couldn't get away from it. What was the coverage like for this open letter?
Oh, very average. We reached out to the New Zealand Herald the day before and hoping that one of their top journalists would take it on. But he decided it was too scary. And we managed to, they did write an article though, which was good. Stuff wrote an article, then buried it on their site. News Talk ZB have had a couple of pieces. They interviewed David Gerard yesterday and Bishop this morning, so that was good. And the platform, of course. But most of the mainstream media, nothing on One News. 60 prominent New Zealand athletes have signed a letter requesting something from the minister. It's a political and a social issue, and silence.
Yeah. Okay, where to from here?
Well, this morning on News Talk ZB, Chris Bishop said that he is going to consider reviewing the guidelines. He admitted that fairness and safety were not included in them, which was great to hear because we didn't get that admission yesterday. So it was good to hear that today. So I'm hoping that he'll follow through on that, and we will just keep the pressure on.
Well done. Congratulations. A sterling effort, and we stand with you. Let's keep pushing. Thanks for your time, Ro.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate your support.
Well, there we go. Simon, what do you think?
I think you should have Ro on and I should just retire. No, look, she's an absolute... Yeah, she's a great asset to the cause. It's that calm, considered, if you will, conversational approach. But I mean, if there's one key takeaway for me, it's actually the role of mainstream media in all of this. You'll recall her saying or just mentioning how the minister seemed to be surprised. Well, part of the reason he's surprised is so much of this topic is captured by an extremely small group of trans activists. And I say it's a small group because most New Zealanders actually, when there's polling on this, say that they do want protection for women's sports. But that doesn't get mentioned. It doesn't get covered. The local New Zealand examples are not covered. And as you questioned her at the end, what happened with the media here? It got buried. They didn't want to touch it. So there's a real gap between what people are experiencing on the ground, what we know is going wrong, but there's a disconnect through media into politics. But I'm heartened, Bob, really heartened that actually the minister seems to have broken through by actually hearing them and is beginning to confront the reality rather than having relied on effectively officials and media which are captured.
Do you think politicians listen to these open letters, no matter who writes them, when they are signed by a number of people who have standing in the community?
I think I would make that distinction. So Do politicians listen? Yes, is the general answer, but not all the time. Just broad open letters can be easily dismissed. In this case, this is Olympians and former Olympians. This is some serious, heavy-hitting people. It does demand more attention. But look, so much of it, Bob, ultimately comes down to ministers on two fronts. One, how dependent on their officials, because officials can try to obfuscate and block if they don't agree with it. And then also, where's the minister's personal convictions around this? In other words, if a minister is absolutely convinced they're right, they've surrounded them with a whole lot of yes men and women, then it wouldn't matter who writes how many letters and how open, nothing will change. But again, this looks like to have made at least some impression on the minister, and this is positive.
So, loaded question here, but do you think the government wants to go anywhere near this issue, transgender in sports? I mean, it's a socially moral issue.
God, no.
They'll kick it for touch, won't they?
No, absolutely, no, not a chance. Not a chance. I mean, particularly, look, credit to New Zealand first. It doesn't mind weighing into this, and there's political benefit to them for that. It's not purely altruistic. But as a whole, the government does not want to touch this at all. They don't like engaging on anything in the culture wars, as it's deemed, or ethical issues. They just don't want to touch it. And so one of two things either happen. Things get buried, and they try to forget them, or they try to move through these issues very, very quickly and get them off the agenda. But no, I'm sad to say this current government's got no appetite for any of this stuff.
Okay, now if you do want to comment, you can come through the Family First Facebook page, or you can come through on YouTube. We're keen to see your comments. Nancy Margaret is very stoked with what Roe had to say, so thank you for that, Nancy Roe. If you're over a certain age, because our next story is about, it's from the Post in Wellington. Australia is moving to impose age limits on social media. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese made the announcement earlier this week, and he said that the Australian government would enforce a minimum age to social media and other relevant digital platforms. Have a watch.
This is a scourge. The bullying that can occur online, the access to material which causes social harm. Every parent is concerned about what their young ones are having access to. Social media has a social responsibility also to do the right thing here, not to pretend that it's nothing to do with them, because it is causing harm.
Yeah, it is causing harm. Now, they asked Christopher Luxon what he thought. He said, quote, "It's something I've been following as well from around the world, as you know, with mobile phone bans and things like that." He said he was up for looking at all of that. They asked Chris Hipkins what he thought. He said, quote, "I do think keeping kids safe online is becoming more and more of a challenge for parents, for schools, even with that incredible filtering that we have in our schools already." And he encouraged parents to make sure they knew what kids were looking at and to use the tools that are available now. TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, you have to be 13 or older, which is easy to get around, and it's a whole age verification thing. Simon, do you think New Zealand will go down this track? I mean, we've asked them about protecting kids through online violent porn, and they didn't want to go near it. I mean, they banned the phones in schools, but I wonder whether that was just an easy virtue signalling option.
Yeah, look, it's actually quite a complicated issue in some ways. Look, I think the government will explore this if Australia is able to implement it successfully. So again, I don't think you'll see this government rush into it. I don't think, it's a little bit like your earlier question. I mean, this is not culture war stuff, but it's not front and centre. But look, if Australia can implement it successfully, and that's the first point. I mean, you've touched on it just now, Bob. They can't even monitor things at the moment. So how is this going to work? You've got a little bit of delusion. I mean, for Chris Hipkins to say did you just say something about the firewalls or protection in schools? Well, only a few weeks ago, an advocacy group, and you've been pointing this out too, that actually children can access all sorts of things at school, terrible content. But look, can I just say this? I'm actually supportive of it because if it's a developmental issue, I would like to suggest to people that this is not a free speech issue. And why I say that's really, really important, because already some within that free speech space go, whoa, be careful. Because as you listen to Albanese, it's all about harm online. People get bullied. There's ideas they don't like. It's very easy to see how you take this ban for children because there's harm to justify, well, we need to ban speech across social media because that's harmful. In other words, you've got to be really careful, I would suggest, of the harm argument. But where Jonathan Haidt and others, and you had Jonathan at the forum, this is about children's development and what we know that actually being in front of screens, doesn't matter if it's laptops, phones, iPads, and not out actually in the world, has a developmental impact. And it's not a good impact. As Jonathan said, they are highly regulated outside and not regulated on their devices. We need to switch that round. So again, I think it's just important for us, and I'll finish here, to couch this as a child development issue. This is not about harm and free speech and trying to hide them from opinions. And I think for me, that's quite important.
Okay, interestingly, you mentioned Jonathan Haidt, the author of Anxious Generation, a new book which looks at this whole issue, and spoke at our conference in July. And our presenter, Tumby Stowers, actually put together a little reel of what he had to say, the solutions to this issue. So let's just have a quick watch.
To solving this is to recognize the key to the origin of the problem, which is a collective action problem. Why are all the kids on Instagram and TikTok, even when they themselves say, if you talk to college students, they say it's really bad for me, it's bad for us, I wish it didn't exist. They literally say that, and surveys show that. So why are they all on it? Because they're trapped, because it's a collective action problem. And so if you take your kids out of it, it's not clear you're helping them, because now they're isolated, they're alone, and they're going to hate you. What that means is that if we take them all out together, we win. And so we have to do this together. And it can be as local as you, if you're listening to this, our discussion here, if you have, say, 9-year-old kids and you're in touch with the friends, the parents of their friends, just coordinate with them. Because if you do these things together, we can solve this. So the first is no smartphone before high school. In the United States, we have a clear divide around age 13, 14. Give them a flip phone. Give them a phone watch. Don't give them the internet in their pocket before 14. Second rule, no social media till 16. Social media is completely inappropriate for minors. It's an adult-only thing. It's full of sex and violence. It's full of solicitation. It's full of marketing. It's full of real dangers for kids, all kinds of scams, manipulation. So, adults, we let them make their own decisions, and if they want to do things that are bad for them, that's their choice. I don't want to let companies just reach my children and do things that are bad for my children without my knowledge or permission. Yeah. This is insane. So no social media before 16, and for that, it would be really helpful to have laws. We can actually get this done mostly just with norms, not laws. But on this point, getting legislation, which is happening in Florida, in Utah, it's happening in the UK, is working on this too. If we can get legislation to say you can't even open an account until you're 16. The law currently says 13 and it's not enforced. Why not raise it to 16 and enforce it? So that's the second rule. No social media before 16. The third norm is the easiest of all. We can get it done this year. It's phone-free schools. It's complete insanity to let kids have a phone in their pocket during school. Most schools say you're not allowed to use your phone during class, which is like saying to heroin addicts, you can bring your needles in to the clinic, you can bring your stash in, but just keep it in your pocket. Just don't take it out and everything will be okay. They can't. They have to take it out. They have to be texting during class. They have to be watching TikTok during class. So the only solution is lock up the phones in the morning when they come to school in a phone locker or a yonder pouch, a lockable pouch. The fourth is the hardest because it's the one where we have to give up something, not our kids. It's more independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world. It means we have to overcome our fears and let our kids out and let them hang out with other kids with no adult supervising. What if there's a fight? What if there's an argument? What if there are hurt feelings? Yeah, that would be actually good. They need that. So again, it may not be as much of a change in New Zealand, but as you said, like you're following us in all the bad trends. So don't follow us. Look at what we did and just never do what we did because we really got this wrong.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, he does sum it up and we've got 1 out of 4. That's 16 years old. What do you reckon about that, Simon? I mean, my kids have got past the 16-year-old age, but it will really take that community decision so that kids aren't saying, well, everyone else has got a phone, everyone else is on social media, why can't I be?
Yeah, I think he's right about that collective side. We don't want to harm our children more by isolating them from their friends, but if collectively there's a direction that says under 16 or under 14, under 13. I can sort of, in my own mind, debate the benefits of those different ages, but and there's good arguments for and against of why it could be 16 or less. But long and short, it has to be collective so that, if you will, all the kids are losing access. But I just want to really stress again, we've got to be very aware that while this is a good initiative, that governments, progressives, the likes of the Broadcasting Standards Authority and the disinformation projects of the world will seize this, Bob, and say, yep, this is an affirmation that there's harm, and therefore this sort of approach of reducing harm needs to apply to adults. And I know for some that might sound like a bit of a jump, but I'm just wanting to let our viewers know it's not. They'll say, well, of course kids can't have cell phones and access to social media, but you know what? We need to control social media for the adults as well. So that's just something we've got to navigate carefully.
Yeah. And I think that was one of the pushbacks in Australia. I saw some commentary where they were saying, well, the problem is there are actually some good things about social media in terms of connection for young people with other like-minded groups where they may be living in isolated areas. So there's always going to be those arguments. I think it's empowering parents to sort of have the ability to control. That was the thing I noticed about what Chris Hipkins said. I agree with what he said, but he said parents need to be aware of the ways that they can monitor and restrict what a child can access. I think most parents aren't quite sure where even to start.
Oh, I can say it as a step parent myself. And I think of myself as pretty tech savvy, actually. I'm still the one in the family that, is approached to help. But the big but is I'm outdone by my stepkids who know how to get around all sorts of things. So, yeah, by and large, I think as we get older, we are more detached from what our young ones are able to do. And so we do need, if you will, some greater corporate help. But so concept, excellent. How we exactly deploy it, far more problematic, with, again, the little warning that this could be the avenue that all of those who want more censorship, more hate speech can sort of use. There's a bit of leverage in there. So we just got to be aware of it.
Yeah. And I think Jonathan Haidt nailed it when he said it needs community buy-in, because at the moment parents just think they have no say or can have no influence. Now, if you want to comment, you can just go to Facebook, go to the Family First page, and that comment will come through here. And also you can comment on YouTube as well. Let's move on to the next topic. And more than 400 church leaders, including all three Anglican archbishops, the Catholic archbishop and a Catholic cardinal, the Methodist Church president and the Salvation Army commissioner, they have signed an open letter and it's to MPs calling on them to vote down David Seymour's Treaty Principles Bill and not let it go to Select Committee. The ACT leader, however, has a coalition agreement that it will go to first reading and will be sent to a Select Committee. So that kind of debate has already happened. The media were very keen on this issue on Monday night.
I was overwhelmed by the breadth of that list. It's an amazing list.
On this letter are Anglican and Catholic archbishops and representatives from almost every faith.
It would undermine what tutility guarantees and what decades of law, jurisprudence and policy have sought to recognise.
Christianity at its best recognises that each person has a fundamental dignity as a human, and that's actually what we're trying to express in the Treaty Principles Bill.
In an earlier Facebook post, he said the Treaty Principles Bill is something that religious leaders should support. Going on to say, if you wonder why Christianity is in decline, today's display of church leaders abandoning a core belief might be a clue.
I would say let's look above politics. This is a justice matter. This is about honouring a covenant.
And it's the church's job, it's part of the church's role to stand up and speak when there is injustice.
We are here as politicians to govern for all New Zealanders, irrespective of their faith. We didn't agree with each other's positions. We found a compromise where both parties didn't get what they wanted.
It's a conversation that I think New Zealand needs to have, and anyone tells you that you're not allowed to have it or that they disagree so you're not allowed to have the discussion, I think most New Zealanders will know where to put that particular argument. It means that it's going to include greater detail than people might have seen before.
It is frankly ridiculous to talk about softening a piece of legislation that seeks to undermine and rewrite the founding constitutional document of this country.
All right, Simon, what do you think?
Well, actually, I'm more in Seymour's camp, actually. I thought the letter was totally inappropriate at a number of at a number of levels. And I want to say right from the outset that, the 400 or so church individuals are welcome to have an opinion. So let's be really, really clear on that. Viewers will know I'm a big proponent of free speech, so they're welcome to have an opinion. But the major problem is they basically said, we disagree with this piece of law. They seem to overlook the fact that the law doesn't actually exist. There is no bill. So they're commenting on something that's not written or drafted yet. There is some indications, Bob, of what will be in it, but there is no bill. So that they're commenting on something that is yet unseen. Then they go on to say that there should be no conversation. In fact, MPs should just vote it down already, just don't deal with it. The public shouldn't have its say. And I think that's quite egregious, actually, for anyone, let alone church leaders, to be saying, well, we're going to have our opinion. We're going to splash it across the front page. We're going to have Chloe Swarlbuck support us, which should be, by the way, a red flag to church leaders, that the Green Party supports them. But no one else is allowed, because they go on to say that, in effect, Bob, the church leaders are worried that you and I and other New Zealanders will create chaos, undermine social cohesion by having an opinion. And that's just well out of line.
Okay,
and then if you want to delve a little deep...
I was going to say, in fairness, with the abortion bill, with the euthanasia bill, with the conversion therapy ban bill, we certainly encourage politicians not to vote for it at first reading. We said, it shouldn't proceed. So what's the difference?
Well, they were saying not even to engage with it. They want the bill stopped from even coming into Parliament. So again, for viewers to understand, this is not about saying to people you shouldn't be able to vote one way or another, as often we would do. So Family First would lobby against euthanasia, against abortion, and encourage them to vote a certain way. These church leaders were saying that yeah, exactly right. They were saying we don't want submissions, we don't even want the process. It's so egregious, they think. This bill is so wrong that it shouldn't even be engaged with, that MP should just reject it outright. And they're talking about not even getting to the first reading. So that's a problem. The other element to it all, Bob, is the language. They're putting this Treaty of Waitangi as something as sacred, they're calling it. They're calling it a covenantal relationship. And, regardless of what people think of that treaty, particularly within Christianity, I'm sorry, but a constitutional document is not sacred as per the scriptures. And the hints in the title, it's a treaty, it's not a covenant. So, there was just a lot of erroneous elements. And can I make the final point, and you might have your views too, but, where were the church leaders in recent weeks, these ones in particular, apologising for the abuse in churches that's been documented in the Royal Commission? Where were these church leaders during the abortion debate and the euthanasia debate, conversion therapy debates? Because I can tell you, being an MP, I don't recall them being around by and large, or not in this grouping. So they might want to stick to the ethical issues rather than actually get into complicated and controversial constitutional ones.
Yeah, I mean, I've just left this up because there's some interesting wording around this, and it's no, actually, it's not in part of this. This is part of it, but the wording in the rest of it says, we note with deep concern the harmful impacts the bill may cause to social cohesion. So may cause that the treaty recognises and acts as a moral and equitable compass for our democracy, and they believe the bill will lead to division and cause the spread of disinformation and hinder efforts at healing and reconciliation. They say they want to work for the flourishing of life in New Zealand for all peoples living here, which actually is probably what David Seymour says as well, whether we agree with him or not. And as you said, we call on all members of Parliament to do everything in their power not to take this bill to select committee. I can, if they had said, we'd like you to vote against this at first reading, but if it does go through because it's part of a coalition agreement, which actually New Zealanders voted for the current government, whether we like the makeup of it or not, and whether we like the coalition agreement or not, there's an honouring of the agreement, which, in fairness, Winston Peters, David Seymour and Christopher Luxon have to honour, don't they? So should they have to break their contract simply because there shouldn't be a debate? I'm not quite sure why we're scared of a debate on this issue Why is there so much heat around even discussing this?
Well, a couple of points. Firstly, people are allowed to think that what ACT is proposing, what they call their treaty principles bill, is wrong or barking mad, or you're allowed to think it's the best thing since sliced bread. Of course, we haven't seen it yet, but the idea is, it's perfectly normal that there'll be a range of views. I sort of said it at the start. I think it's actually quite insulting from these church individuals to talk about harm, disinformation, and fearing social breakdown, because they're saying that we are going to cause that. They feel so elite and aloof that they give their opinion, but no one else is to, Bob, because there'll be a breakdown in social cohesion. And that's us. That's who they think. It's the 4 million plus other New Zealanders they're worried about. I have to say, I think we can have good discussions, and constitutional ones are tough. But we see this time and time again now, and it even links to the sports issue we just touched on. A lot of the groups who don't want their ideas challenged will always try to couch it that anyone else's contrary opinion is going to cause harm, violence, social breakdown. They basically, I put it this way, they're not confident of their own arguments. They want to retain the power that they have, and they don't want it to be challenged, and that's why they couch it in the language that they do, and it's just inappropriate.
I mean, there's words like harmful impacts, social cohesion, spread of disinformation, division, hinder efforts at healing and reconciliation. I mean, in fairness, they do say we believe, and it may, but I just wonder why we can't go to the next step of having a debate around this issue. The problem is, I think, is that especially the Māori Party, but also the Greens and the media have literally poured petrol on this debate and lit it in order to try and shut it down, and they're just not interested. But look, we've had that with other issues. I mean, conversion therapy, birth certificates, other bills where literally it feels like it's been shut down. We've gone through the process, but it's been, we turned up to the select committee knowing that the select committee just were not listening and weren't even interested in engaging. So, I mean, the only other thing, Simon, is should we be patting them on the back and saying, whew, great, finally, we heard from you. You spoke up. Great, keep it going.
Well, I think yes is a short answer. I mean, I actually have no problem with church leaders speaking into the public space. The concept of separation of church and state is terribly, terribly misunderstood. People of all sorts of faiths, beliefs, be it from Christian, Muslim, atheistic, everyone's allowed to bring their views. I mean, I used to joke in Parliament, I was supposedly not to bring my Christian views, but, Jacinda could bring her Marxist views along. That, so everyone's welcome to bring their views. So I'd actually like the church leaders to speak more, but I'm not optimistic. This Common Grace, the umbrella organisation, if you look at it, if you look at even the language you've just used, it's all wrapped in progressive Marxist narrative. But hey, if they're emboldened by this letter, it would be marvellous for them to come out on a whole range of issues, such as euthanasia, that we're confronted with at the moment. It would be marvellous if they could speak up. But I don't know about you, Bob. I'm not holding my breath.
And the unborn child, it would be wonderful if they spoke up for that as well. I did just want to show you a little clip, though, because during the media conference on Monday night after Cabinet meeting, when the Prime Minister fronts up before the media, they actually asked Christopher Luxon about his response to this letter from churches and asked him a little bit about his evangelical faith.
I was overwhelmed by the breadth of that list.
Not that
it's
one.
Amazing
Hang on.
list.
On this letter,
this one.
The letter, is it anti-democratic for church leaders to speak up about this? Because David Seymour says it is. So
No, they're entitled to their opinion, and if they have a view, they're entitled to actually say what they think.
And as a committed Christian yourself, do you think that it's appropriate for
I appreciate the value judgment you've told me.
Is it appropriate for religion and politics to make?
Sorry?
Is it appropriate for religion and politics to make?
We are here as politicians to govern for all New Zealanders, irrespective of their faith.
Could I just ask you about that? You've been described just before by Jenna as a man of faith and then by a Christian.
I heard that. It's very nice of you guys to make those assumptions.
I think a few people might be curious about what your values are. I mean, you've been evangelical Christian has been thrown around as well.
I've seen a lot of labels thrown at me.
Well, here's your chance to kind of let us know a little bit about your faith.
I'd refer you to my maiden speech, Jason, if you're really keen to understand it. Yep.
Well, if I was training him in media, I think he got 100% because he batted it away. He had a quick response and it was kind of like nothing to see here. But I thought it was interesting that the media wanted to have a chat about his evangelical faith.
Yeah, it was very well handled, both in terms of how he handled that personal side of it. Clearly he's not comfortable with the questioning. And you know what, that's actually not a wrong position for him to be in. I mean, actually, for a lot of us, our faith is quite personal. There's an element to share it, but actually it's more of a gotcha politics of what the media are trying to do. I mean, were they grilling Jacinda Ardern or Chris Hipkins on their personal faith? Well, of course not. So there's a gotcha politics. But he's also correct, the Prime Minister, that everyone's allowed to have their say. And again, I just want to return to the fact that church leaders or individuals were very welcome to share their thoughts. But what they simultaneously were doing was saying that no one else should have a say, and that's the fundamental problem.
Yeah, actually, probably I was just thinking about that. In our defence, when we asked people not to vote in the first reading, we encouraged people to have their say and contact you as MPs, and I'm sure you got inundated with emails. Do you? Telling you vote for it, don't vote for it? That's part of the process, isn't it?
It is. Oh, yeah, look, I would not see the advocacy that Family First, for example, or a whole lot of other groups do as anywhere near what these church leaders have done. I mean, Family First says, here's our thoughts, here's our arguments. You encourage your members to have a say. It's the opposite of what the church leaders are saying. You ask members and supporters, go and engage your MP, respectfully have a conversation. The church leaders are saying to us as the general public, you guys are too dangerous. If you have your say, society might fall apart. So don't do it. Don't say anything. They're the complete opposite, Bob, and they're out of line, completely out of line.
Okay, well, just to add insult to injury, the bad news is that David Seymour has secured a full 6-month-long select committee process. Now, we did have a look at how long other bills were considered. We looked at some of the more controversial ones. Conversion therapy bill, we had 5 weeks to make a submission. Actually, I remember those days. The bill would be released, the first reading would be held, and somehow we had to turn around all our advertising, motivate the church to speak up, get involved, make submissions. How do you make submissions? 5 weeks for conversion therapy bill. Abortion bill, we had 6 weeks. The marriage bill back in 2012, they gave us 2 months. The euthanasia bill back in 2017 was just under 3 months, although a month and a half of that was over Christmas when it's impossible to motivate people. And yet this one has got 6 months. So do we give David Seymour credit for being willing to allow a long debate to happen, which is possibly more dangerous for him? Or is this a good method because actually it gets people discussing the issue and he thinks he can be persuasive?
I wouldn't attribute any sort of moral quality to Seymour's motivation around the 6 months. And that's not trying to be nasty. I mean, look, 6 months is what's normal. That's what is meant to be normal. So that's the first thing for listeners and viewers to understand, that every piece of legislation is meant to have 6 months. Now, it's up to the Parliament to decide.
Oh, now you tell me.
Yeah, it's meant, now I tell you. So everything you just described around euthanasia, conversion therapy, abortion is unusual. That's the government can decide to do it, but the fact of by being the government, they've got the vote, so they get to do what they want. Look, actually 6 months is going to suit Seymour to the ground. I mean, this is a political play by him. I mean, he does believe in it for sure, but this helps ACT. He knows that a lot of New Zealanders support this concept. They don't, he's going to stir it up. So for 6 months, right across, by the way, say summer, discussed over the barbecue, Waitangi Day. I mean, it suits his agenda. But you do have to ask the question, or I do certainly as a former politician, of in some ways, how's the cabinet allowed this? Like, this is going to drag out and be basically used to beat National in particular over the head. What's his name? Luxon's going to have to, having a senior Biden moment here. Luxon's going to have to stand up at Waitangi Day and face the full heat, which you know darn well that's where it's all going to focus in. So we've got a lot of political theatre ahead of us.
Okay, so you're not recommending a staff retreat at Muppet Pie here next February?
No, it might be good to be out of the country. No.
Okay. Look, we're just about out of time. It's so much fun when you go on. So I am just going to jump to the last topic because it's an important one. It's called the Substack segment, and it's where we talk about a couple of publications. Now, you're on Substack. I am as well. And this is your latest Substack entitled Alarm Bells. What are you talking about?
Oh, it's an emotional read, but a wonderful read. No, it's about euthanasia. I just highlight 4 major issues that the reports from the Ministry of Health have illustrated. So they've got their numbers wrong. There's whole issues around psychological support and a couple of other things. So really important for people to understand. I'm not here to argue the ethical argument of euthanasia. It's more pointing out the failures in the current system. And so it's an encouragement to people that you still have time to submit to the Ministry of Health on the current review on euthanasia. You've got about a fortnight left. So jump onto the Ministry of Health website, find the euthanasia review, but go onto my Substack, On Point, and this will give you, again, just real factual insights into what the latest report tells us. But of course, Bob, you're more prolific. You're involved with Substack as well.
Well, there's a bit of a competition going on because every time I get your one, I feel the pressure that I have to release one. Yes, this is my one that went out this morning, and it's actually about some principals sent me a survey that had been sent from an academic at Massey University, and basically it was asking, this is to primary school principals, asking them, do they have any gender diverse students, and are they running gay straight alliances in their primary school? Do they have the gay books in their library? Are they running a Pride Week? Almost, do they have a flag? Do they allow biological boys to play in the girls' sports teams? And the reaction, the really funny part, Simon, is that they ask the principal what their gender is, and they have a list of about 8 options, including a blank one as well. I looked blank when I looked at all the options, but they have about all these options. And then the next question is, what type of school do you teach at? Do you know how binary and transphobic the answer was? It said girls only, boys only, and co-educational. I mean, that is just shocking, isn't it? So insulting. But anyway, they couldn't quite see the irony of that. So look, go to Substack and you can read this one. So this is Simon's one, very important one on the development of euthanasia, and my one on Massey University. Actually, I think we have got time just to kick in one more quick topic, Simon, because it is a favourite. We've got about -1 minute. And that is that Auckland Grammar principal says that there is a buzzword resilience, which is around at the moment, and that schools need to be taught to toughen up. And the reason that the principal of Auckland Grammar said this is because some Christchurch students at Christchurch's Hagley College are going to be allowed to stay home due to extracurricular activities or sickness and mental health, and they can part-time study from home. It's a new trial. They'll go to school 3 days, and then they will have 2 days of learning through video calls. Tim O'Connor, from no relation to you, of course, Auckland Grammar headmaster, said, they need to toughen up. What do you think?
Look, I'm going to sound like a politician here. They're sort of all right. I mean, look, overall, for most students, actually turning up to school in person is a good thing. And actually, we're not going to be helping their resilience or their depression or anxiety by allowing them to stay home. But there are some students, particularly neurodiverse, there will be some who will benefit, and I know have benefited from online courses. So there is a place for that. But the other element we should add in is actually online learning is not as efficacious or effective, I'm sorry to say, from what I can see. It's just not the same. And if you think about banning cell phones in classrooms, if you think that's a good idea, then how is a student going, home all day in front of their laptop a good thing? So will this be a benefit to some students, that hybrid model? Of course it will be. But I think we also intuitively know that if this gets rolled out as a good thing, then more and more parents will want their kids staying at home, and kids will say, I need to stay at home. And they're just going to get more anxious and less resilient. And I think Tim O'Connor's right in that, in general, we're not actually helping our kids at times the way that we indulge things. What Jonathan Haidt said. They've got to go outside without supervision and argue and fight and have fun and climb trees and learn that way. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you may provide that as the exception, but to make it the general rule for every student. And I always find that they tend to go back to the stress was around and it's all because of COVID. And yet what Jonathan Haidt highlighted in his presentation to the Forum on the Family and in his book is that, no, it began well before that. It actually began when people were allowed to go onto their phones, which, of course, if you've got a child at home for 2 days, you think they're not going to be on that sort of isolated and actually making their stress levels worse. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure that they've totally thought this through. And we seem to be, I just thought the wording of Tim O'Connor from Auckland Grammar, what was it, muscling up or hardening up or something? That's not very woke, isn't it, to say things like that? It's very naughty.
Sort of fits his brand or that of Auckland Grammars. Again, there's a place for this for some students, but we know it through a whole lot of other issues. Once you've said there's exceptions for some, then other parents will say, well, my son and daughter requires that too. And if you don't, it's discrimination. And we all know what happens once you start throwing the discrimination word around. So, limited place for it. But I think kids in schools, kids outside playing and engaged in other, this is all good stuff.
Okay, we're out of time. Great discussion, Simon. Have a great weekend, and we'll be back for Straight Talk on Monday night. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week for Political Playback at 5 o'clock. Have a great night.